let's go ahead and finish up domain 4.3. So now we're going to go over the different ways we can respond and remediate if there is a cybersecurity incident or if we have vulnerabilities. So one way we can remediate and respond to known vulnerabilities is by patching. We want to have a good patch management process in our environment that is doing timely updates in a secure fashion, and that also enables our business operation. And with our patching, we're going to constantly and consistently reduce the attack surface by minimizing the number of exploitable points in the system. Insurance. So one way we can respond to potential vulnerabilities, instead of avoiding them and by patching and getting rid and mitigating, we can just get insurance and do something called risk transfer or risk transference. So this allows organizations to transfer some of the financial risk of cyber incidents to insurers' cybersecurity insurance. Segmentation. So segmentation involves dividing the network and allows us to isolate potential security breaches. So what we're saying here is that if there's an incident, if there's an exploit, if there's a known vulnerability that has been exploited, one thing we can do either actively during incident response or proactively is just segment. If we have an EOL or end of service device or server, segment it, right? It's a way for us to contain potential breaches. It reduces lateral movement. So if we have a threat actor trying to move laterally between our systems, it's going to reduce that and try potentially to mitigate that risk. Compensating controls. So compensating controls are security measures that are put in place to mitigate the risk when standard controls cannot be applied. So what do I mean by this? So let's say we do have an EOL device that we cannot do lifecycle refresh on. What are the compensating controls then? So what can we do? Well, one thing we can do is we can segment, we can harden the device the best we can can enable AV, anti-malware, EDR on that legacy device. We can do all these things to compensate for maybe a vulnerability on there that can't be patched because there's no longer vendor support. So we can compensate for that by adding in additional security, configuring defense in depth. So this helps us mitigate some risk. It helps in reducing the risk to an acceptable level despite the presence of vulnerabilities. It also ensures that the organization maintains compliance. So sometimes that is a thing where an industry understands that you may have EOL. Well, if you do, end of life, right? End of life devices. Here's what you have to compensate. Here's how you have to compensate to be in compliance still. Exceptions and exemptions. So exceptions and exemptions are acknowledgments of deviations from standard security policies. A well-known one in the government, right? We need tokens for our admin accounts. Well, maybe there's third-party apps that don't allow that certificate-based authentication. It just doesn't interact. It doesn't have the proper development for that. So maybe an exception to that is allowing some users with a role-based purpose an exemption to that policy to allow their elevated privileges and admin accounts to be used without a token. So we're going to have controlled deviations. This is going to allow for temporary non-compliance, or it's going to allow for non-compliance that has to be, re-audited or re-looked at every 3 to 6 months or reapproved every 3 to 6 months. And with that, we're going to have good monitoring, right? We want to make sure we're doing account audits so that if someone does have that exception to the policy and it's been 90 days, we send a reminder and say, hey, we need this reapproved. We need to reevaluate if we still want to make this exemption. Rescanning. So rescanning involves reevaluating the security posture after remediation efforts to ensure that vulnerabilities have been effectively addressed. Of course, auditing, guys. So audits are formal examinations to ensure that security measures and controls are implemented and met and are in compliance. So we have independent verification. This is like third party. This is like a third party coming in and offering their assessment, their opinion. We have compliance confirmation. So that is auditors coming in to actually say, hey, you are in compliance, or let's give you an ISO certification, right? That's an audit we can do that we can show our customers saying, hey, we got ISO 2700 standard certified. You can trust us with your data, right? Verification. So verification involves a series of checks and tests to ensure that remediation measures effectively eliminate or mitigate identified vulnerabilities. So this is gap identification, right? Meaning, okay, we did our remediation. Now, how are we verifying? Well, let's look at our root cause analysis. Let's look at our lessons learned. And did we actually apply correct mitigation efforts, patches, and implementations? Then, of course, reporting. So how are we going to report? So this is going to be sometimes found in our overall business continuity plan. If there's a communication plans, how are we reporting to maybe legal teams, maybe to law enforcement if there's a big breach? How are we reporting to the stakeholders? How are we communicating our findings and our actions and the outcomes of vulnerability management? So our reporting is going to be defined by management, by the business, right? So it's going to go over how we report, who we report to. And again, this is typically going to be found in the BCP. So this is going to involve detailed findings. So maybe we want to set a standard that says we want to provide comprehensive information on identified vulnerabilities in the analysis, an action summary. So if we're not doing this for incident response, like an incident already happened, how do we report it? This is like for vulnerabilities. Let's outline the steps we're going to take. So, hey, we have this vulnerability. Here's some action items that we need approved and we need the budget and maybe additional resources for. And then future recommendations to say, hey, we believe this may happen with X, Y, and Z systems as well. Let's implement these proactive measures so that when we bring in new software, new vendors, and we onboard employees, we have proactive measures already in place. Okay, let's go ahead and do our quiz now. Okay, so domain 4.3, response, remediation, and reporting. So question 1. What is the primary goal of verification during an audit process in vulnerability management? That's going to be C, to confirm the effectiveness of security controls. Question 2. What is the role of compensating controls in vulnerability management? That's going to be B, to provide an alternative measure when primary controls cannot be implemented. So again, this kind of deals with if we're making an exception, what compensating controls do we have? Do we have an end-of-life server that we need these compensating controls for? Question 3. What is the purpose of rescanning after vulnerability remediation? There's just kind of like going over like zero trust as well. Never trust, always verify. We just should always verify, right? We need to re-verify. We do that by rescanning, okay? Question 4. What is the primary purpose of patching in vulnerability response and remediation? That's going to be C, to repair vulnerabilities in software and systems. Question 5. Why is reporting an essential component in the vulnerability management process? So that's going to be C, to provide stakeholders with a clear understanding of the organization's security posture. We gotta communicate, right? We need to have a communications plan in place for any breach, any vulnerability, any cyber incidences, if they affect, and they all do, the business. Question 6. How does segmentation contribute to vulnerability response and remediation? That's going to be B, by dividing the network into smaller, manageable sections to contain breaches.